From Cosatu's perspective, how significant is the decision to scrap the VAT increase for ordinary South Africans?
Good evening. Thanks for having us. We welcome it as Cosatu. Ourselves, like other organizations across Parliament, across society, had opposed a VAT hike. We felt it's going to present an unfair burden to struggling workers, to the families. And we felt it's simply unnecessary when there's plenty of other much more progressive alternatives to raise the revenue, to find the money necessary for the budget. So I think for us it's welcome. It does confirm the announcement already made by the Minister for Finance earlier this week that the VAT hike is not going to go ahead. So it provides legal certainty for everybody concerned, including companies who are going to struggle now to adjust the VAT prices. But I think for us, it's a positive step forward. Yes, the whole budget process has been quite messy. I don't think anybody would have wanted to go this way over the past 2 months. But I think we must, really celebrate an occasion as we honor 31 years of democracy, that our democracy has evolved. Government has shown the necessary humility and political maturity that when society, when trade unions like Cosatu, when political parties across Parliament reject something, that government has got the humility to accept that and to go back to the drawing board. Yes, it's not elegant, it's not neat, it's quite messy. But I think it's a positive thing when society is able to move to nudge government in the right direction and government is able to respond positively. So I think for us what's critical now is for government to return back to Parliament as soon as possible in the next few weeks, as the Minister already indicated earlier this week, with a revised budget, including the division of revenue bills, the appropriation bill, and so forth. But I think the critical thing is now not just simply to reduce expenditure by that 75 billion rand over the next 3 years, but to do so in a way that doesn't hurt the poor, that doesn't undermine the capacity of the state to provide the essential public services that workers, that society depend upon, and that doesn't also deny relief and protection to the poor or infrastructure stimulus into the economy as well. So I think for us it's critical to find the right balance and not just simply to go for a narrow budget cutting response to these developments.
Matthew, you described the process, certainly in the last 2 months, as somewhat messy. How much of this could have all been avoided with the right levels of consultation prior to the tabling of that proposed increase?
All of this could have been avoided. We had warned government, even before the budget speech was meant to have been tabled in February, that a VAT hike wouldn't enjoy the support of society. We felt it was completely unnecessary. We were disappointed that, between the February and the March budget cycles, that yes, government did do well to reduce the VAT hike proposal from 2% to 0.5%. But again, we just felt that in this climate, after a decade of state capture and corruption, the society is correctly tired of wastage in the state. The society expects government to find alternative measures besides burdening the poor, burdening the working class. All of this could have been done. Again, even when the Finance Committee and Parliament adopted the revised fiscal framework about a month ago, they could have made an alternative plan. And the better option would have been to delay processes for a few weeks, to revise the budget, to get it done neatly and so forth. And the Constitution does allow that, does allow for some delays without impeding the system. But look, it is a learning process for Treasury, because Treasury has been used for all these decades to drafting the budget basically by themselves. It's a learning curve for the ANC, which has been used for 31 years to be basically being the single ruling party. And of course, there's a learning curve for opposition parties who have been sitting on opposition benches for years and now are also part of government, having to accept the responsibilities of government. So it's an adjustment, but I think it's a good thing. Democracy is evolving, but we need to find the right balance. It's good we've made sure that government listens to society's frustrations and avoids burdening the poor. What really is critical now is to make sure that the final budget does give relief to the poor, does give resources to rebuild the capacity of the state to provide public services, and does inject stimulus into the economy to help it to grow and help it to create jobs. So we've got to find the right balance. And yes, it is messy, but it's a learning curve and it can be a positive experience at the end of the day. But even after we've finalized the budget of Parliament over the next month or so, there is a need for a thorough discussion at Parliament, with government, with society at large, about what should a budget look like. What are the revenue options that society can accept, and what do we think needs to be done? What expenditure is critical in the government? What expenditure can we live without? And what are the necessary compromises that we need to put in place if we're really to have a budget which is really going to grow the economy, to capacitate the state, to reduce unemployment, to tackle poverty and inequality? If we continue on the path of simply thinking the budget is about cutting the corners, tinkering on the sides, that we can continue on a path of business as usual and yet expect different results, and we were making a fundamental mistake. So we should really exploit this opportunity to really come with a very progressive and a decisive budget if we really just see the economy growing at the speed it needs to grow.
So Matthew, the billion-dollar question is that 75 billion rand gap needs to be filled. And you've suggested that the alternative means of raising the 75 billion without that half a percentage point on VAT. How is that money going to be raised?
So we think there's quite a few decent options. I think firstly, that 75 billion rand is over 3 years. In this current budget year, because SARS has already exceeded its revenue collection targets by 9 billion rand, the shortfall is about 3 billion rand. So the real pressure point is actually for next year and the following year, which is about 30 billion rand each year. We think number one is to give SARS the resources it needs to improve tax compliance. We have a 64 tax compliance rate. SARS should be tasked to raise that compliance by 2% a year. That will generate an additional 40 billion rand of existing taxes owed to the state. Because number one, you have to have a sense of tax fairness, that you don't just squeeze those who pay taxes, but you also go after those who choose not to pay taxes. We think there is space to have discussions with the development bank, with industrial development and the public investment corporations. Can they not take over some of the economic infrastructure projects where they could earn a return on investment, but yet ease the burden on the state? So, for example, could they not take over the 13,000 university beds, some of the investments in electricity or in roads and ports and rail, where they could collect a return on investment? We think similarly too, could those institutions, the developmental finance institutions and the CETAs, the National Skills Fund, not be engaged to also contribute towards the cost of some of the public employment programs, especially on the skills training components of those programs, because that is a legal mandate to do so. That's what they already do, in fact, need to do. We think that also there's space to have engagements as well about reviewing the tax regime to make sure that the wealthy pay their fair share, to reduce some of the tax loopholes for high wealth individuals and companies, and to see how can we ease the burden upon the poor. So we think there are lots of options that are available which won't hurt the poor, which can generate the revenue owed to the state, and also kind of give some relief to the economy as well. Specifically within SARS, there's a huge amount of money that's lost every year to illicit trade, whether it's tobacco and alcohol, whether it's customs fraud by imports coming through our borders, and that can generate the revenue the state requires. But a lot of these things are hard work, but we have to treat it as the urgency it is. We think Parliament itself should be calling the South African Revenue Service at least once a month to come and report back on how far is it in collecting that 800 billion rand of existing taxes owed to the state. So if we begin to do these things, if we begin to treat these issues with the crisis, with the emphasis they deserve, we can turn things around. But we shouldn't be continuing on the path of business as usual.
So Matthew, it's great that there are ideas and suggestions, some of which you raise, such as tax compliance, in order to raise the amount or raise the shortfall. But there's also a huge amount that's going to unbudgeted expenditure, that's going to fraud and corruption within arms of government. Just how much does government need to do to stem off some of these losses?
I think that's part of the point why society was not willing to entertain any tax hikes. Because when you see every Sunday money is being lost because of corruption, because of wasteful expenditure, and not enough consequences, and of course society should ask, why should workers tighten their belt further when there's still a huge amount of wastage in the state, and you don't see enough consequences? So we do think at times we should be asking, are we capacitating the National Prosecuting Authority? Are we filling the prosecuting vacancies to enable it to take people who have stolen from the state to prison? We should also be asking ministers, directors generals, premiers, mayors, why are they not utilizing the Auditing Amendment Act, which enables them to hold personally liable, to confiscate the assets, to even attach pension monies and so forth of senior officials, of politicians who have allowed corruption to take place, have allowed wasteful expenditure to take place. You'll find in the medium-term budget statement of Parliament in November that billions of rands will be returned by municipalities who lack the capacity to spend money to the fiscus. So we need to really shake things up to make sure the money is spent correctly, that is spent timelessly and so forth. So I think there is a lot of fat in the space. And also we've built over many years a culture of tolerance for mediocrity, of corruption, of wastefulness. And society is correct to ask questions, to ask why is this not being tackled? We should not have what we saw today in newspapers reports that in Gauteng, 34 million rand is alleged to be spent every month renting offices for the Gauteng provincial government. Yet you have got a lot of buildings standing empty that belong to the state. So we do need to ask questions, because society can't be asked to pay up more and still struggle. And yet somehow in the state, we've allowed a culture of mediocrity to be built up. And at the same time, when you find municipalities, for example, or state-owned enterprises not spending money, yet at the same time, you've got thousands of nurses sitting unemployed. The healthcare is overwhelmed. So there is a need for money to be spent correctly in the state. And sometimes some of our colleagues don't see that urgency. So there is a need to crack the whip. And even for Parliament too, to ask the hard questions to departments. And again, if we look at local government, you'll find that many municipalities fail to pay workers on time. They fail to pay the pension funds on time. They fail to provide basic services. So
you do make many valid points, particularly that around tax compliance and the impact that it could have on raising that 75 billion rand deficit. Matthew Parks, Cosatu, speaking to us on the reaction to scrap VAT. Appreciate your time.